Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a fantastic, fun-filled Friday show for you today. Our usual Friday co-host, Amber Duke, is off doing more fun things than working today, so I am glad to be joined by Dan Joseph. Good to have you with us, Dan.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Plenty to talk about.
Now, what's on your notebook for today?
So, my notes today, Dan, are full of praise for a Conservative. A real one, not a fake one, who has shown the courage to stand up to Team Trump. I'm talking, of course, about Danielle Sassoon. Sassoon is a former law clerk for the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, a member of the Federalist Society, and someone who, less than 2 weeks ago, wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed blasting former President Biden for the commutations he issued as he left office. She was also, until yesterday, the top federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and she has resigned on principle. In doing so, she has shown the kind of values that deserve the highest credit. And I'm talking about qualities like bravery and principle and integrity. Those are values that are in miserably short supply these days, especially in a conservative movement that has capitulated to Trump and his cult of personality. But Danielle Sassoon has stepped up by stepping down. She resigned rather than go along with the Trump administration's instructions to halt the prosecution of New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Adams was, of course, indicted in September on charges of bribery, wire fraud, and accepting illegal campaign contributions. And since then, he has opportunistically sucked up to Trump. He got his reward earlier this week when Trump's acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove instructed prosecutors that they were, quote, directed to dismiss the charges against the mayor. Now, perhaps Bove's name sounds familiar, and that's probably because he was the lawyer who defended Trump, unsuccessfully, in the Stormy Daniels hush money case. But back to Eric Adams. He denies the charges against him, and of course he was entitled to his day in court. His trial had been set for April. But we won't get to see that now because Adams has become a kind of useful Democrat for Trump and his allies. That's mostly because he echoes Trump's language about the justice system, contending that he, Adams, is being targeted for prosecution for political reasons. Now, if you read the indictment against him, any fair-minded person can see how specious that claim really is. Anyhow, Adams traipsed down to Mar-a-Lago days before Trump's inauguration for lunch with the incoming president. The mayor called the meeting productive and said, this is roughly 3 months before his trial, remember, that the two men had not discussed his case. Totally. On Monday, Adams reportedly told his top commissioners and officials not to criticize Trump. That was the same day Bove issued his directive for the case to be dropped. So we see where this is going. Anyway, back to Danielle Sassoon. She didn't want any part in this. In a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, she adamantly stood by the strength of the charges against Adams as, quote, supported by fact and law. But she went further. She in effect accused the Trump administration of making a corrupt bargain. You see, the charges against Adams won't be dismissed permanently. They will be dismissed without prejudice, which means they can be resurrected if the mayor does not play ball with the president. To Sassoon, the suggestion that Adams should be rewarded for so long, but only for so long, as he backs Trump up, was intolerable. Bove's preferred actions, she wrote, would set, quote, a breathtaking and dangerous precedent. It was, she added, tantamount to using the criminal process to control the behaviour of a political figure. Bove's response was furious, and Adams's lawyers have denied there was any quid pro quo. But when DOJ leaders took the Adams deal out of Manhattan's hands this week and transferred it to the Public Integrity section in Washington, there was more uproar. There, 5 people have reportedly resigned rather than bow down to Bove and, by extension, to Trump. It's a fast-moving story, and it stinks. To be fair, some Conservatives have raised their voices to praise Sassoon. Sarah Isgur, a Justice Department spokesperson during Trump's first term, though now a critic, tweeted in part that every DOJ lawyer should be proud of what she stood for today, which was nothing less than the rule of law. Ed Whelan of the Conservative Ethics and Public Policy Centre praised Sassoon's courage and integrity. But in terms of elected officials, the support was all from Democrats, like Senator Amy Klobuchar, who praised Sassoon's refusal to, quote, do Trump's bidding. Or, as Congressman Eric Swalwell wrote on X, Danielle Sassoon properly told Donald Trump he's corrupt as F. In case you're wondering, this is what integrity looks like. And it is what integrity looks like. And it's a great shame that more Republicans won't admit it.
Well, as a conservative, let me say that I do believe that she's a hero as well. And I think 20 years ago, maybe everybody would agree on that. But the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump is doing whatever he can to justify politicizing the Department of Justice. And this was always my greatest fear about a second Trump term. It's been the use of the DOJ for political purposes, never a good thing. But at the same time, Trump justifies it by saying, well, they did it to me, so therefore I can do it to them. Now, I suppose that's debatable whether you really believe that the documents case and the January 6 cases were politically motivated. I tend to believe that they were justified in many ways. There were two pretty bad things that Trump is accused of doing here. That being said, this risks starting a very vicious cycle. If Trump does this, then what's stopping the next Democratic president from doing this? What's stopping presidents down the line for the next 100 years or so from politicizing the Justice Department and using it as their own personal lawyer? We don't want that. That's going to hurt everybody.
Right. And I think this is, I agree with what you just said for a start, and I think it's to the credit of principled conservatives that they make that point. I mean, small c conservatism was, I think, in large part animated by the realization that norms and traditions do exist for a reason, and to have those broken down to facilitate individuals' wishes, individuals' presidents' wishes or individuals' politicians' wishes, is problematic. And I do think that it is very disturbing that more conservatives haven't stuck firm to that position and have instead made themselves, well, in my view, changed or abandoned their principles in order to make nice with Trump.
It's a very difficult time, I would say, to be a conservative and be a principled conservative these days. Trump doesn't allow that. If you stray off the reservation even a little bit, he has the people who he controls on Twitter go after you. They can ruin your career if you're a politician. They can give you a primary. It's a very, very scary thing, and politicians are terrified to get on his bad side. I do hope, I'm trying to kind of figure out where this is going to go next. My suspicion is that Donald Trump is going to continue to do this if he gets away with it this time, and just do more and more of it. Use the DOJ as his personal lawyer to get rid of any problems that he may have, and take his allies, like it appears that Adams is now, and solve his problems for a payback. And the payback in this case would be, I want your help when it comes to immigration in New York City.
Right, and my point, which I made in the piece there, is I think that one of the problems in the Adams case is the charges continue to hang over him, right? They have been, as it were, paused or halted, but could be reinstated. So if Adams wanders off from the preferred Trump line, then he's back in trouble, presumably.
Yeah, and one of my other questions was, why not just give Adams a pardon? That would seem like it would be the easier way to do this. Maybe he's testing him out. Maybe he wants to see if he's actually going to do what Donald Trump wants him to do. But the whole thing is very, very upsetting. I think Robert F. Kennedy Sr. would be rolling over in his grave right now if he saw this.
For sure, absolutely. Well, let us know what you think, but in the meantime, we have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this. Stay with us. The battles surrounding illegal immigration are heating up.
Border czar Tom Homan went on Fox News last night to explain why he thinks the DOJ should investigate Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Let's watch.
But Tom, you got AOC out there, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman, putting out a webinar, doing a webinar to help illegals avoid, I guess, apprehension, giving tips about how to continue to remain in the country and ultimately game the system.
And I sent an email today to the Deputy Attorney General. At what level is that impediment? Is that impediment? I'm not an attorney. I'm not a prosecutor. Is that impediment? Is that impeding our law enforcement efforts? If so, what are we going to do about it? Is she crossing the line? So I'm working with the Department of Justice and finding out where is that line that they cross. So maybe AOC is going to be in trouble now, but I need the AOG to opine on that. But because there's impediment is impediment, in my opinion. I'm not a prosecutor, but we need some further guidance on that.
So to be clear, AOC's office did indeed post a webinar Wednesday on Facebook. That webinar guided migrants on what their rights were and advised them on how to deal with ICE. Ocasio-Cortez responded to Homan on Blue Sky, writing, "Maybe she's going to be in trouble now. Maybe he can learn to read. The Constitution would be a good place to start."
Attorney General Pam Bondi is also wielding the power of the law on sanctuary cities. Earlier this month, she announced lawsuits against Chicago, Cook County, and Illinois. The DOJ says that these sanctuary cities inhibit federal law enforcement from doing their job. Here's Bondi on Wednesday announcing yet another related lawsuit.
We're here today because we have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder, who is with DMV. This is a new DOJ. New York has chosen to prioritize illegal aliens over American citizens. It stops today. As you know, we sued Illinois, and New York didn't listen. So now you're next.
In a nutshell, self-proclaimed sanctuary cities limit the information they share with federal officials when it comes to illegal immigrants. Portland, San Francisco, New Haven, and now Seattle are themselves suing the Trump administration. Those cities allege that Trump is illegally cutting off federal funds to them over their sanctuary policies. Seattle City Attorney Ann Davidson told the Seattle Times in a statement, quote, "I think it's important to say this should not be tolerated, and we're going to make sure we have our voice heard. It is an issue about federal overreach into local control."
New York Congressman Mike Lawler wrote on X, "New York must end its sanctuary state and city policies immediately. The failure to obey federal immigration law and fully cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement has resulted in the death of Americans. It must end today. Governor Hochul, repeal your executive order now."
Meanwhile, satirical account Rep Jack Kimball, that is not a real rep to be clear, that's why it's satirical, wrote on X, "Wow, AOC has been caught telling immigrants their rights. No wonder Tom Homan is outraged. If people start exercising their rights, it could really impede ICE." So, Dan, I've a few things to say on this one, and I think it's an interesting discussion to have. One of the points I think to start off with is what is meant by sanctuary city is often not that well defined, and it can cover a whole range of behaviour. And the thing that I would emphasise is something that I don't think is all that well understood, or sometimes I think it's willfully misunderstood. Part of the reason that sanctuary cities exist, and part of the reason that local law enforcement is sometimes barred from immigration actions, is because in many of these cities they have decided, for their own reasons, that if an illegal or an unauthorized migrant sees a burglary or an assault or a rape, that the city has an interest in that person reporting what they have seen to the police. And if the risk is that by reporting it to the police, they uncover their own immigration status and become targets themselves, it is obviously a disincentive to report crime or to cooperate with the police in any way. That seems to me a very valid principle.
Yes, it absolutely does. But there are other issues there. There's the fact that when conservatives and a lot of other people see this, they see it. I think most people have great empathy for illegal immigrants to this country coming from places that had horrible, horrible conditions. But when they see cities accommodating them in this way, when they see cities saying, we're open to you, and they actually get a little upset because they feel that the government is now aiding and abetting something that was originally illegally done, because it was illegal when they crossed the border, by these immigrants. So they draw the line there. Also, the other problem I see with this is perhaps the immigrants also misunderstand this, and they say, well, I can go to a sanctuary city and I'll be safe there, and that encourages more illegal immigrants to come across the border. If that's the case, that's something that definitely needs to be looked at. I don't, I think that local law enforcement cooperating with illegal immigrants is a very, very important thing. We need this to solve crimes in the country, but at the same time, I kind of understand, especially when you have cities that are overwhelmed by illegal immigrants using the resources of the city, as we've seen in places like New York or Chicago or even Denver.
Yeah, I mean, I am not completely blind to that argument, and I am not someone who's on the far reaches of the left when it comes to immigration. I mean, I think that there are obviously genuine issues when you have millions and millions of people in the country who aren't legally entitled to be there. Self-evidently, that's a problem. My issue really is it is a problem for the immigration authorities to deal with in one instance, and in a broader sense, an issue for the Congress to deal with in terms of passing laws that make more sense. Now, the enforcement of the laws that do exist does, in fact, in my view, fall to people like ICE. It doesn't fall to the New York Police Department or the Seattle Police Department or whomever.
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right on that. It does fall to the executive branch to make decisions on what they want to do here. And that's why you're seeing this fear, yes, but also concern by people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on this particular issue. But like I said, the supremacy clause is very clear. I don't have a problem with those illegal immigrants, those here illegally, knowing their rights, knowing what they can and can't say, knowing what they can and can't do. At the same time, everybody needs to respect the laws, and everybody needs to, whether you like it or not, give the authority to the executive branch when it comes to illegal immigration. This is going to be a front and center issue for the entire administration. They're going to be fighting about this. It's going to be stuck in the courts. Perhaps the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on this. Mr. Homan, though, seems dedicated to solving this problem. He seems like a very, very hardline type of guy, and it'll be very interesting to see how not just immigrants, but also members of Congress sympathetic to illegal immigrants adjust to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think in relation to Homan, I mean, he's certainly a hardline guy. Now, he has at times seemed to suggest that the deportations won't be quite as sweeping as President Trump at one time suggested they would. Other times he has adopted very hardline rhetoric. The issue that I would have with the clip we played where he went after AOC is his objections seem to be her informing people of their rights, which, as you said, they've every right to exercise. It is not, it's not some law-breaking offence on her part. I don't know how he reaches that conclusion.
I don't believe it is. But Homan, as a hardliner, is going to attack anyone who suggests that the immigration, ICE, is doing something wrong. And that's part of the Trump administration's plan here, is to go after absolutely anybody who questions their methods. What concerns me the most is you don't want, I don't think anybody wants to see immigration officials, ICE, going into houses in the middle of the night, taking children out, screaming. You know, remember Elian Gonzalez back and the controversy that surrounded that. That would be problematic for the administration if the tide turns on them. Right now, cracking down on illegal immigration is relatively popular. The term mass deportations, it's a little scary to me, but for some reason most people are saying, okay, let's do that. I think once they know what it means, though, once they see what it entails to have a mass deportation, if indeed they're not just going to go after criminals, if they're going to start going after just the average run-of-the-mill illegal, that's going to be problematic for them.
Sure. No, I think that is, and I think that could be a point at which public opinion changes. In any event, coming up on Rising, Trump takes over the Kennedy Center. Stay with us for that. MAGA is reshaping the nation's capital. The latest casualty is beyond politics. It's the renowned John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.
It began last week when President Trump announced this on Truth Social. At my direction, we are going to make the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. great again. Trump went on to say he would immediately terminate multiple individuals from the board of trustees, including the chairman, who do not share our vision for a golden age in arts and culture. And finally, we will soon announce a new board with an amazing chairman, Donald J. Trump. There's nothing in the nation's capital that is untouchable by the president. The president's firing spree continued through the week. It began with acting chairman David Rubenstein, philanthropist and head of the Carlyle Group. He then fired the president, put himself in charge, and named a bunch of loyalists to the board.
In fear and protest, artists have begun resigning and cancelling shows. The musician Ben Folds and the opera singer Renee Fleming said they were stepping down as artistic advisors with the centre, as did the treasurer of its board of trustees, TV producer Shonda Rhimes. Comedian, actress and Hollywood creator Issa Rae pulled her sold-out show, An Evening with Issa Rae, posting on Instagram, unfortunately, due to what I believe to be an infringement on the values of an institution that has faithfully celebrated artists of all backgrounds through all mediums, I've decided to cancel my appearance at this venue. At least one artist, W. Camus Bell, decided to mock what's been going on. His take from last night was posted on Instagram. He wrote, "Hey DC, there are a few tickets left for the first night of my stand-up at the Kennedy Center. It was originally called Who's With Me, but now we are renaming it to Wookie Camus Bell's Wokefest 2025, Wokes and Jokes for the Woke Folks." Trump has falsely said that a handful of drag shows at the center targeted young people. Moreover, shows connected with the Kennedy Center have been cancelled or scrubbed from its website.
The Kennedy Center has been billed as the nation's cultural institution. In the past, it has been nonpartisan.
Well, this is all very dear leader kind of stuff, is it not, Dan?
I don't like it at all when conservatives target the arts, or anybody targets the arts for that matter. But that being said, conservatives have believed, not wrongly, I feel that the arts is dominated by the left. It has been for maybe 50 years, maybe even longer. But the least conservative thing is to allow the government to get involved somehow in making what they see as the arts move in their direction. That's a very, very dangerous thing. And it could lead to, in a more dystopian world, propaganda put on stage. If I were the artist here, I would not be ending my run at the Kennedy Center. I would be keeping my shows just to make sure that no space is allowed for, Kid Rock doing his version of the Rush Limbaugh story or something like that. Very troubling.
Yeah, I mean, I think the state-approved art is always dangerous, and it's also rarely good art. I take the point that the mores of the artistic community writ large are pretty liberal, and conservatives often complain about Hollywood or about the theatre or about shows that they believe target conservatives. Now, there has been, to be fair, a sort of fairly thriving, almost like a subgenre, particularly in the movie industry, of movies that are clearly intended to appeal to conservatives and appeal to conservative themes, and some of those have had a lot of commercial success. In the case of the Kennedy Center, the board, or I'm not sure if it's exactly the trustees or exactly how it's described, but they are often presidential nominees. And so Trump, during his first term, put a number of people on the board. Biden put a number of his people on the board. Mike Donilon, the very close Biden advisor, was on that board at one point. But the point is that there has traditionally been a mix of people appointed by either president, and the programming has not been explicitly political. And I think the danger here is, well, firstly, just the Trump vanity element of it, but secondly, the idea of it being sort of didactic art intended to further whatever are considered MAGA-friendly things.
That's what I worry about too. If you look at conservative art, movies, even music, they're into the rap business now. There's several conservative rappers. The content of that is always political. There's no other way to go about it for them. They say, oh, Trump is great in their rap songs. They make movies often to do with Christian themes. That's a big one. Unfortunately, most of them are very bad. I've seen some of them. They're not the quality that you would expect from entertainment, the entertainment industry. That's why you need to leave art to the artists. Yes, some of it's going to be partisan. Yes, there are going to be themes in it that conservatives don't like sometimes. But if you want quality art, you leave it to the people who know it best. And for whatever reason, artists come up and they adopt liberal attitudes. There will be some conservatives out there. It would be best if conservatives weren't blacklisted from places like Hollywood or places like the music industry if they do share their opinions, but unfortunately that seems like they have a long way to go.
No, I agree. And I also think we don't want to sort of vault past the Trump role in all of this, which appears to be not only appointing himself to a position here, but the widespread suspicion is he wants things that either glorify him or he wants to bar anything that would be even mildly critical of him. And I think that's where it gets into that sort of slightly buffoonish but also dangerous autocratic tendency.
That's very dangerous. I think that I don't think Donald Trump is real patron of the arts. Something tells me he's not the one sitting down for a play by I'm trying to think of some of the ones I did in college. I was an actor in college. Charlie's Aunt was one of them. I don't see Donald Trump sitting down and enjoying a good musical, a Pippin or something like that. But Donald Trump would control some of the things that are put on that stage. If he does see something that he does not like, he will say no to it. If he sees something he likes, if he comes across a piece of conservative art that promotes him, promotes his agenda, I don't doubt that he will try to put that on stage at the Kennedy Center. That's not what you want, though. The art has politics involved in it, but most of the time it shouldn't be political at all. Yes, you're right. He's not going to put on stage, a January 6th play, and no one would expect that, I don't think. But at the same time, you want art to be free. Freedom is what gives art part of its beauty, and he needs to make sure that that remains. The Kennedy Center is a jewel of Washington, D.C. It is one of the greatest artistic venues in the country. I'd hate to see it ruined. I'd hate to see its patrons driven away because of politics.
It is extremely rare for me to defend Donald Trump from this seat, but I do think for a man of his age, he doesn't have bad music taste. The songs that he plays before his rallies, he generally plays the Stones and Elton John and some other people, and for a 78-year-old man, I think we can live with that. But the bigger point is about alarming actions being taken about the arts, and we don't like that. Stay with us. We have more from In Rising after this. Gallup is out with a new poll, and there are some interesting findings. It appears that Democratic voters want their party to tone things down. 45% of those polled said they would like to see Democrats become more moderate. Compare this to 2021, where only 34% voiced that sentiment. Only 22% right now say they would like to see the Democratic Party stay the same, and 29% want it to be more liberal.
Meanwhile, things are a little different on the Republican side. 43% of Republican voters who were polled would rather see the party stay the same. About 27% think the party should become more moderate, and 28% think it should be more conservative. As Gallup writes in their report, for now, Republicans overwhelmingly approve of Trump and are more satisfied with their party's current ideological bent than Democrats are with theirs.
As for Democrats, Gallup writes, the current sentiment may very well be a reaction to their losses in 2024 as they look ahead to 2026. So, curious poll findings here. I mean, apparently measuring Democratic voter sentiment wanting a move to the centre. Now, I wonder what that means in specific terms. I do think that those numbers point to a problem of branding or political positioning for the Democratic Party, because my instinctive reaction to that poll and to those findings is the idea that people feel the Democratic Party has perhaps wandered too far to the left on what we might call identity politics or wokeness or things of that nature. I am more skeptical that they think that the Democratic Party has gone too far to the left on economic matters. And I say that because we know that there's a good deal of resentment and anger in this country about people feeling their economic positions are stagnating or falling backward. And I think you could argue that the Democratic Party has not captured that sentiment, has not been a vehicle for that sentiment. So my perception is what they're talking about is moderating from some of the quote-unquote woke stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there was a sense that they got beat partially because of the wokeness, the identity politics factor. This reminds me a little bit of 1968, Richard Nixon versus Hubert Humphrey, a very close election. But the Democrats lost, and they had a choice to make after it was all over. They could have either continued with the establishment, represented by Lyndon Johnson, John F. Kennedy, Hubert Humphrey, or they could move over with the activists, who are represented by the anti-Vietnam War crowd. They decided to go with the activists. And after that, from 1972 on, basically with a pause for Jimmy Carter's win, but on till mostly 1988, the Democrats lost every election in landslides. What they need to avoid doing if they want to win and can win in the future and win the House back in 2026 is they need to make sure that they're not alienating voters with those liberal policy ideas. I do notice, like you said, that the Democrats in almost every interview they give, they find some way to mention the billionaires, right? The 600 billionaires in their class that are apparently ruining the economy. That could work for them. I think class warfare and class resentment is a tool that has worked for the Democrats in the past. But if they do start to dwell on that identity politics, if they start to dwell on here's why the gays should be aggrieved, here's why the African Americans should be aggrieved, that's not going to serve them well.
I agree broadly. I think that, and I've made this point before, I'm not sure that it is quite right to just regard this as a level playing field in which Democrats decide to talk about the quote-unquote woke issues. That does happen in some parts of the progressive base, I would agree. But I have made the point on this show, in fact, before, that I have never ever heard a TV interview, for example, with a Democrat who, when asked about, let's say, the minimum wage, if they ever are, or the provision of health care, if they're ever asked about that, or the economy when they are asked about that, pivot to talk about personal pronouns or trans people in sport or anything like that. There is a conservative-leaning media machine, both in terms of traditional media and in terms of social media, that constantly harps on those topics. And then when Democrats mention those topics in response to being asked about them, it's like, well, you're always harping on the trans issue or whatever.
You're right. Conservative media does focus on that quite a bit, but there is a difference between the professional Democrats, the professional class of the left, and the activist class. And a lot of the times what we see out in the streets, some of the things that get the most attention are the activist class, the people we saw in the streets for Occupy Wall Street, the people we saw in the streets for Black Lives Matter and that movement. That's what a lot of people see and associate with the left, even if they're not, because, let's face it, moderates and a lot of conservatives don't necessarily see the economic talk that's going on the left. They kind of have blinders onto it. But again, I think that's something they really need to crack down on, and they especially during their primary season, which comes up in 2028, they need to ensure that they're not overtaken, I think, by the Bernie Sanders style candidates. Now, I don't know how you feel about Bernie Sanders, but I do believe that, yes, on the surface, some of his policies are popular with moderates, popular with independents. Once they figure out what they entail, though, they don't like them as much. For example, if you talk about universal health care, single-payer health care, and you say, oh, everybody gets health care and the government is the insurance to make the payments. They like that idea, but then they hear, oh, by the way, you're going to have to lose your private insurance if you have it, and they completely turn themselves off to that.
Maybe. I mean, I think that argument is one that could be made more effectively, and I think there is actually a greater degree of popularity for the concept of universal healthcare than people sometimes credit there as being. To my mind, it is ludicrous that the United States, the richest country in, as Sanders would say, the history of the world, doesn't have universal health care for people. This is a battle that was won in Britain for the National Health Service in 1947 or 48. A socialist by the name of Aaron Bevan set up the NHS in Britain, and it's regarded as one of the great achievements of British domestic politics. The fact that the United States has never got to that point does strike me as rather bizarre. But I just wanted to briefly, Dan, get back to another point you make about how these things are talked about. The comedian Bill Burr was on, I think it was a podcast earlier this week, where he was excoriating billionaires and essentially saying they were to blame for lots of things and that it was a disgrace for people to be working, having to work two jobs in order to pay the rent. And he was really having a go at that billionaire class. And there was a whole lefty debate on Twitter about the fact that that view actually does connect with what a lot of people are feeling. But there's a sort of consultant class in the Democratic Party for whom that's too business unfriendly or too uncouth or something. And so that in itself prohibits someone like Burr becoming like a liberal or lefty Joe Rogan, which is something that the left has talked about a lot recently.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the attacks on billionaires work quite well. There are not many people out there who say a billionaire and say, oh, they need their taxes cut. Even myself, I'm not a big advocate for taxing the billionaires less. That being said, I think they're hiding what they really want to say, which is, let's tax people who are making over $400,000 a year more. They always put it in the context of millionaires and billionaires, and that's not good economic policy to tax those people more, because those are the people who are the business owners in this country. I wish we'd be more honest about economics instead of just attempting to make people feel bad about other people and making them envious of other people. I think that's a big problem. But that being said, look, I think that the class warfare is one thing, but the identity politics is something that they really need to get a hold of. And it's not just that the politicians are talking about it. I don't think you'd see Kamala Harris go out there during the campaign and she wasn't talking about LGBTQ people all the time. She wasn't talking about African Americans all the time. But it was associated with her. It was associated with her from things that we understand the Democratic Party to deeply believe in, and the fact that they're made up of all of these special interest groups. And if you've ever been to a liberal progressive rally, it's not usually a rally about one thing. It's a rally about several different things, all those different identity politics issues. And when people see that, they say, wait a minute, I know some of the things the Democrats believe in, and I like them, but that's just too wild for me. You saw this with Bud Light too, right? Bud Light in the Dylan Mulvaney episode, that really hits people hard. People do not like that, and they feel like they're being preached to.
Well, I will give you the last word on that. It is a conversation that will go on for some time to come. In any event, up next, we'll talk about the beef between the Trump administration and the Associated Press. Stay with us. The Trump administration and the AP are currently in a bit of a spat.
The AP said this week that the White House blocked them from multiple press events. One of them was a press conference with President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Why did that happen? Apparently because the AP refuses to change their editorial guidelines on how to label the Gulf of America. The outlet says they're sticking with the Gulf of Mexico, since the AP is an international outlet and not every country recognizes the name change.
Here's a CNN panel getting feisty over the subject.
This is a power play, plain and simple. The president wants people to obey. He wants people to use the words he chooses. He wants people to fall in line, and if they don't, they lose their access. They're not allowed to be in the company of the president.
If the bully manages to bully one, he's not going to stop at one.
I don't think this is as emotional as you're making it out to be. You know, take away the hysteria for a moment. First off, Trump doesn't need
Who's
AP
being
to
hysterical?
Take, both of you. Trump doesn't need, first of all, AP
You
to
obviously
take
don't know what a
photographs.
hysterical Ana Navarro is
I
like.
just believe it comes down to compliance.
That's true,
Trump put out an executive order. There was an executive order. He changed the name legally to Gulf of America. They're United States-based. I know they're international as well, but right now they're covering U.S. politics. So if he makes an executive order, they should respect that. And if they don't, being there is not a right, it's a privilege.
The AP released a statement on the matter, writing, "The decision by the White House to block an AP reporter from an open press conference with President Trump and Prime Minister Modi is a deeply troubling escalation of the administration's continued efforts to punish the Associated Press for its editorial decisions." The AP called this an incredible disservice to the billions of people who rely on the Associated Press for nonpartisan news.
Editor at the Daily Signal, Bradley Devlin, wrote on X, "During the Biden administration, the AP changed their style to no longer call what was happening at the border a crisis, essentially because Jen Psaki asked them to during a briefing. Naming the Gulf of America was an official policy decision from the U.S. government. What seems more troubling, the former or the latter?"
Meanwhile, Bulwark editor Jonathan Last wrote on Blue Sky, "The legacy media was quick to defend Fox in 2009 when it thought Obama was being mean. Today, with the AP, crickets. The difference is that media organizations knew they had nothing to fear from Obama, so protesting was free." This again seems, we were talking earlier in the show about the Kennedy Center, and this seems to me another instance of trivial, or I should say petty, but important behavior by the Trump administration that aims to intimidate or to punish people for not doing what the president wants. The AP can stick with, as far as I'm concerned, the name Gulf of Mexico if it likes. This was a decision that was taken to unilaterally just change the name with a stroke of the pen. The AP notes its international status and all of that. The bigger point here, I think, is about freedom of speech generally, but also about the capacity of news organizations to use the language that they believe to be accurate and fair and impartial, not the language that the Trump administration decrees that it wants to have used. So even though we can laugh about some of the absurdity of Gulf of America versus Gulf of Mexico, the actual underlying point isn't funny at all, because it's really a president and his allies trying to dictate to media organizations the language that they use, and I think that's very dangerous.
Bullying is the name of the game for the Trump administration. It's worked for them before, and I assume they're going to keep using that tactic. This is out of line with the spirit of the First Amendment. I'm not sure about the legal aspects of it, but certainly with the spirit of it, you don't want to be blocking major news organizations from the press room in any case, and you've seen the Trump administration do this. So if they've replaced a lot of the mainstream media with conservative media outlets, they're clearly biased, Newsmax,
right,
One America, those guys. But again, as with the entertainment industry, the conservatives are not completely wrong that there has been a left-wing bias in the mainstream media for quite some time. And I believe that conservatives love seeing this. I wouldn't do this if I was president, but conservatives, many of the Trump supporters, love seeing this. This is one of the reasons they voted for Trump, because they know he'll attack the media. He'll go after CNN. He'll go after all these organizations that they have come to hate over the last 40 years. Now, will it work? I certainly hope not, but the Biden administration did this too. I seem to remember Joe Biden keeping the Washington Post out of the press room because they did a story on Hunter that the Biden administration didn't like. I could be wrong, but there was something along those lines.
No, I honestly don't recall that, if that happened, and maybe our audience can put me right in the comments. I would have thought that if the Biden administration barred the Washington Post in particular from the briefing room, there would have been a very big rumpus about it. But firstly, in defense of the mainstream media, I think that often the extent of the quote-unquote left-wing bias is very, very exaggerated. And I think there has been a concerted effort, going back about 40 years, as you say, to finance efforts that are really intended to discredit the mainstream media. So Fox News rose in part by blasting the mainstream media. But there's also this other ecosystem of think tanks and so-called watchdog organizations that are really trying, in my view, to bring the media to heel toward a conservative perspective. So I think that's a really big danger here. Now, in relation to the Trump administration, I think you're quite right to make the point that this goes hand in hand with the efforts to lever people out of briefing rooms, for example, and put conservative organizations in. But it also goes to this thing that we're seeing right now in the Trump administration, where websites of government agencies are being taken down. Certainly there was a database of January the 6th related crimes that has now been kind of vaporized into the ether. And I think that this is a whole broader effort to change the information space in a way that favors the administration.
Yes, and I believe the media has done that as well. I think one of the bad things that's come out of the insistence that there is a liberal media bias over all those years is that it's driven all the media outlets, whether left or right-leaning, into their own corners. And now they only report on the things that are going to be convenient for their side. I think that's unhealthy. I think it's one of the major problems in our democracy right now that needs to be fixed. This is petty. The Gulf of America thing, I remember Hillary Clinton laughing out loud at when he mentioned that at his inaugural address. It's silly, but you're right. At the same time, questions about how we're going to report the news. When you talk about media bias, it's not that they're lying. It's not like they're promoting candidates necessarily, although some of them do that. It's really about how they're reporting on things, the words they're using, the terms that they use. And I think Donald Trump thinks that he's very good at this, using certain words like fake news, which he really put into the lexicon. He's hoping he can mold the way they report based on that. And that's exactly what this Gulf of Mexico comment is intended to do. And it's also intended to figure out who's loyal to him.
Yeah, I know, and it is at some level about working the refs, as we would say in football, about trying to intimidate other outlets to move in their direction, as I say, to bring people to heel. We try not, of course, to have only one view here in Rising, which is why we're having these debates, but we will go on to debate other things next, including whether universities are hiding where their money is coming from. Stay with us. Aside from diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives, President Donald Trump is also cracking down on foreign aid to American universities. University presidents told the New York Times that research projects tied to USAID and foreign funding have been put on pause.
Why might Trump want to pause foreign aid to universities, you might ask? A new report from the Washington Free Beacon's Alana Goodman gives us a clearer perspective. Goodman has a new piece titled, "Under Biden, American universities raked in nearly $1 billion from mystery offshore donors, including some linked to China." Goodman writes, while the universities listed the unnamed donations as coming from places like Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, the Free Beacon traced millions of dollars back to donors linked to China.
Here's an example showing an apparent discrepancy. Goodman writes, state records show that Penn received $1 million in 2023 from Kahoo Holdings, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but anyway, a shareholder of Chinese shopping platform Meituan Dianping. Penn's federal disclosure lists the money as coming from a donor in the British Virgin Islands to support the artificial intelligence program at the Wharton School. Here to dive deeper into these implications is Alana Goodman herself. Alana, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we tried to summarize as best we could the report just there, but first of all, I have two questions really. One is obviously what the concrete dangers are of this kind of funding. And secondly, we noted that, I think you phrased it as under Biden, or at least that was how it was done in our introduction. Is this something that is unique to the Biden presidency?
It actually is. So under previous administrations, the federal government would publish the names of foreign donors to universities. This is information that universities are required to disclose to the federal government. Under the Biden administration, this was when they first stopped publishing the actual source names of the donations. They do have a database that is publicly accessible where you can look up the donations, but it only shows the country where the donation comes from, not the name of the actual donor. So when we were looking into the most recent federal disclosures on this, we found that hundreds of millions of dollars were coming from tax haven countries, the Cayman Islands, the Virgin Islands, Bermuda, $500 million alone from Bermuda, which is a country of 60,000 people. And so this raises questions of where did the actual donations come from? When we were able to to look at this with next to the state records disclosures from Pennsylvania, which Pennsylvania does publish the names of the donors, we found that actually some of these donations were coming from China. So that was a big issue because China does try to buy a lot of influence on university campuses.
A few years ago, Ted Cruz and some other senators were very concerned about these so-called Confucius Institutes that were coming from China. There was some suspicion that they were trying to implement Chinese ideology, that kind of thing, on American students. Does that have anything to do with this? Are they now trying to hide those kind of influential college campus organizations through this kind of funding?
Well, certainly I think that we know that China does try to buy influence on college campuses through this funding, not just China, other countries as well, including Qatar. And so that is something that definitely Congress has looked at because this has become an issue with attempts of buying foreign influence on campuses. The other issue is also some of these countries trying to get intellectual property. I mean, we see this a lot with China. A lot of the universities that they fund are heavily involved in like the AI space. And so that is something that Congress has raised concerns about as well.
Is there anything that can be done about this? I mean, beyond actually passing new laws, are there regulations and laws against this that are not being enforced, or is it just a loophole that we think, frankly, Chinese and other international donors are perhaps exploiting?
Well, it's partially an enforcement issue, and people I've talked to expect the Trump administration to definitely crack down on this more than the Biden administration did, which is, when there is some lack of reporting from universities on this. But there's also, an issue of creating new laws, and there is a legislation that's coming out of the House Education Committee that just passed earlier this week through the committee called the Deterrent Act, and that would create stricter disclosure requirements for universities, and it would also have stricter penalties for schools that don't comply with the disclosure requirements. So that is something that we're definitely watching to see if that ends up passing Congress.
How long do you think it will take before Congress can get to this issue? Obviously, school is in. The universities aren't going to say, no, we don't want your money anymore. At least I don't think they would say this. What is the plan for actual addressing this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how long it'll take to get through Congress. We'll definitely have to watch that. I do know that people I talk to expect the Trump administration to really move quickly on this. And obviously, we're still waiting for Trump's Secretary of Education to get confirmed. And, people expect that this will move quickly after that happens.
Is there, and I ask this in an open-minded way, is there any defense of these donations? I mean, could you just say, well, you know, people are entitled to make donations from where they wish, overseas or domestic, and that's fine. It pays for, you know, things that universities and colleges need, and so assuming there is no ethical issue with the specific donor, then people should be allowed to do that if they want.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the real big issue here is the disclosure requirements. And if universities aren't properly disclosing these donations, and if the public isn't able to actually see what, you know, what the source of these donations are, then that's a problem, because, you know, we need to be able to see that and kind of make that decision of, is this a proper donation or not? And that's been the biggest issue on this.
Alana, before we let you go, I have a question that has nothing to do with the topic at hand. Behind your head, there's a place name, and all we can see is Berg at the end. Is it Leesburg, or where is it?
It is.
It is.
Yes, I'm in Leesburg right now.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm glad you're showing some Virginia pride there. Alana Goodman, thanks for joining us on Rising.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Next up on Rising is Google caving again. Stay with us. If you're someone who relies on Google Calendar to remind you of important dates, you may now miss out on some.
Google removed cultural events like Black History Month, Women's History Month, Pride Month, Jewish Heritage, and Hispanic Heritage, to name a few, from its default calendar.
Last week, some users noticed this change, which ultimately followed an online backlash. One Blue Sky user wrote, "This is what's so funny about rainbow capitalism and corporate blackface. It was never real, actual support, but the right and the left can't help but lose their minds over the fake pendulum swinging. It's like betting on theatre." Another Blue Sky user said, "Google Calendar removes Black History Month, Pride, and more. Company says listed holidays were not sustainable for its model in latest move to roll back diversity efforts. I have never seen such a bunch of belly-crawling bootlickers in my life. Never even imagined them." Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke wrote on Blue Sky, "It's beyond disappointing to see Google comply with Donald Trump's most hateful urges. From celebrating our greatest heroes and our cultures to reminding us of the horrors of the past and the price of progress, these commemorations matter. Now, Google is playing a direct role in their erasure."
Despite some of the backlash, some ex-users on the right supported the move. David Leatherwood, Log Cabin Republicans digital director, wrote on X, "You're excited because Google Maps changed to Gulf of America. I'm excited because Google Calendar got rid of Pride Month. We are not the same." Another ex-user wrote, "Google has just removed Pride Month and Black History Month from the calendar app. This comes as they obeyed Trump by changing the Gulf of Mexico's name to Gulf of America."
After the backlash, Google said in a statement, "Maintaining hundreds of moments manually and consistently globally wasn't scalable or sustainable."
So in mid-2024, we returned to showing only public holidays and national observances from timeanddate.com globally, while allowing users to manually add other important moments.
It's pretty hard to believe Google's explanation that it was too difficult to keep up with every occasion. This move by Google, after all, coincides with President Trump's move to appoint a new task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. The 2-year task force is chaired by the Attorney General, Pam Bondi.
The task force is assigned to review and identify any unlawful anti-Christian actions and change any objectionable policies and recommended steps to rectify past failures.
Well, on the Google point, first of all, I think it is fairly ludicrous to make the claim, as they are doing, that it was too impractical or too difficult to keep up with these holidays. I checked just before this segment what the market capitalization of Alphabet, Google's parent company, is, and it's $2.26 trillion. The idea that there's somebody in the back rooms of Google with a pen and paper trying to figure out where the public holidays lie, I think is just a completely absurd explanation. So if they wanted to change these things because they wanted to take a step back from so-called wokeness, just say that. But I find it a rather lily-livered thing for them to have done.
I think this is about money for Google. I think they saw the writing on the wall, following the Dylan Mulvaney episode, which we talked about earlier. They saw that these DEI kinds of things, people celebrating Pride Month, that companies doing so, that was not selling with the people. That was something that people were a little bit sick of, and I think Donald Trump tapped into that quite well as well, and they decided to roll it back. Google is a company just like anybody else. They're going to try to maximize their profits, and if they thought that this kind of thing was driving people away, they're going to scratch it.
Yeah, I mean, I question, though, Dan, the extent to which that drives people away. I mean, would people really see, Pride Month pop up on their Google Calendar and be so outraged by that they would stop using Google? These things have been, as we alluded to, noted for quite some time on the calendar app.
I don't think just Pride Month. I think you put Pride Month at the beginning of June and that would be fine with most people. I think what it would be was if there was one on just about every day, right? If you're seeing something that's celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion on every day of the month, people are going to say, come on, do we really need to do this? Do we really need to celebrate every single milestone by every single ethnic group individually, or can we come together as Americans and celebrate our Americanness? I think that's kind of what it had to do with. I think it's obvious that you want to keep the holidays that are federal holidays, especially Juneteenth, right? MLK Jr. Day, those are very important to recognize and to celebrate. But yeah, I think people just kind of get sick of it. I think people feel like they don't necessarily hate these groups. They don't necessarily hate LGBTQ people. They just don't like it being forced down their throats.
I hear you. I just don't really agree, because I think that part of this is about making events that celebrate diversity or sometimes commemorate terrible events in American or world history less visible. And I think there has been a broad push against DEI in ways that are really a pretext for pushing back against racial equity itself or gender equity itself from people who don't like that, who feel challenged by it, who feel perhaps that their societal position is challenged by those things. And that is where my skepticism of it really resides.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case. I think what people see when they see these DEI kind of causes that are celebrated is they see it as them being called a racist, them being called a bigot. We have to remind you of all this stuff. We have to constantly tell you about these days and about these events and about these milestones, because we don't think you appreciate them enough, because we think you are bigoted. We think you may be unconsciously racist. Or go ahead.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that goes again to the debate about things like school curricula, where there's this argument about, for example, you shouldn't basically allude to or mention elements that are racist in the history of the United States. Now, that is part of the history of the United States. It doesn't mean that there are not honorable and admirable moments in the history of the United States either. But, I mean, the slavery and the treatment of black people in this country in particular is just this enormous stain that does exist and shouldn't be washed away in the name of patriotism.
I haven't seen anybody or any school say we shouldn't teach about slavery. That's obviously an important moment, a fundamental moment of American history. I think when we talk about things like critical race theory, what we're really talking about is we don't want kids indoctrinated to believe that the country is racist now, that the country is inherently racist, subconsciously racist, systemically racist. There are a lot of people who disagree with that, and they don't want it taught as being fact to their kids. You see it a lot in the transgender ideology, the transgender teaching. I think it could, parents think it could confuse kids. I think in some cases that's absolutely right. They want things that are age appropriate. I disagree with this idea that people are trying to erase the history. I want, if I had kids, I'd want them taught about slavery. I'd want them taught about Jim Crow. I'd want them talk about segregation. But I don't know if I necessarily want them to think that America is still the systemically racist country.
Well, I think that there is quite an amount of research that would suggest that racial discrimination is still something that very much pertains in this country. There have been those surveys, for example, that have been done where they send identical resumes with stereotypically black names versus stereotypically white names, and the black applicants typically get less callbacks. The whole criminal justice system and the issue of sentencing is one where I think many people would argue there is still racial discrimination in terms of those sentencing guidelines. So is teaching that, is acknowledging that, calling America a racist country? should be done, whatever people think about it.
Yes, it depends. You can take them on a case-by-case basis. I think a lot of what we've seen with police and police being vilified like they were during the Black Lives Matter rallies, that was something that I thought was wildly inappropriate, something that was based on this idea, well, we're systemically racist, the police are all racist, and therefore we must call attention to it and tear that system down. I thought that was fundamentally unfair to the police. So I suppose you can go both ways on this issue.
Getting briefly to the second part that we mentioned there, which is this anti-Christian initiative or push or whatever on the part of the president, I am someone who is skeptical that there is really strong anti-Christian bias in this country. It has surfaced recently in relation to the people who were granted clemency of some kind regarding anti-abortion clinic protests. I would argue that the cases that I read about those people plainly broke the law, but perhaps from a conservative perspective, you see it differently.
Based on the facts of that case, I believe that they were blocking the door and that they were right to prosecute those people. I don't see a whole lot of anti-Christian bias. I think a lot of that could be that the Christians often throughout history have seen themselves being persecuted, but nowadays they do because they see that not everybody's with them anymore. Not everybody in this country is Christian anymore. In fact, the number of Christians is declining rapidly. I think I can understand how some people would be afraid of that and want to try to repair that by overworking the other side.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's something that Trump is obviously responding to the concerns of his base on. I just question in a pretty fundamental way whether it really exists or whether it is a way simply to cater to that base. But we have a lot more topics to talk about on Rising right after this. Before we end Rising today, we need to acknowledge a mistake from yesterday's show. Jeffrey Toobin was not hired as a staff opinion writer for the New York Times. Instead, he is a contributing writer who has published some essays in the past and may occasionally write some in the future. We certainly apologize for any confusion that factual mistake may have caused. Now, on to our final segment of the week. Elon Musk and his son X, full name X-A12, appeared at the Oval Office Tuesday alongside President Trump.
Okay. This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
And he's got this, check out this cool chain he's got.
And the View's Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar had quite a laugh over Elon Musk's 4-year-old son. They had this to say about their appearance.
So yesterday, Elon Musk took his son X to a press conference. I did not name the child. And I don't want to hear any more mess about our names, okay? Okay?
Oh.
Anywho, he took little X.
Funny. And little Instagram.
He doesn't own Instagram.
He doesn't own Instagram. He just took little X with him to a press conference in the Oval Office to defend himself against critics who say he should not have the power to gut the federal agency. Take a look.
An example of the fraud that you have cited was $50 million of condoms was sent to Gaza.
Some of the things that I say will be incorrect and should be corrected. So nobody's going to bat 1,000.
Host Joy Behar talked about this in social media memes.
Lies, and more lies, and then it goes out there. That there's a meme going around that I have to show. Look at this. Show that picture of the boy in the office. This is little kid, he's adorable, little Elon Musk's son, saying, little X saying to Donald, why are you sitting in my daddy's seat?
Whoopi has said he is the shadow president.
Many social media users blasted their remarks. An X user wrote, "Wow, Whoopi just spent multiple minutes making fun of Elon Musk's son. Name Elon's son's name. Your name is literally Whoopi." Libs of TikTok also chimed in. Whoopi Goldberg is now making fun of Elon's kid's name as the audience laughs, picking on a child. She's evil. Nicholas Fondicario, associate editor for the MRC and Newsbusters, wrote on X, ABC News host Whoopi Goldberg, a fake name, and Joy Behar mock and bully Elon Musk's 4-year-old son over his name. X's mother, a Canadian musician known professionally as Grimes, took to X, the social media platform, to express her disapproval of her son's appearance. "He should not be in public like this. I did not see this. Thank you for alerting me, but but I'm glad he was polite. Sigh.
In a separate post on X, Grimes wrote, "For whatever ways in which one wishes to complain about administrations before this, there was a sense of decorum by both Republicans and Democrats that, no matter what you think, showed at least the veneer of respect toward the people. That is part of leadership." So I don't like children being mocked. I think that should not be done. And I think to the extent that there was mockery there, which there clearly was, and particularly in relation to his name, that is bad. I don't think it reflects well on people who do it. I was actually reminded, and I'm showing my age here, you may or may not remember, more than a decade ago, there was a thing where an MSNBC host rightly apologized for having mocked. There was a family shot of Mitt Romney's extended family, and it included a black grandchild, an adopted son of Mitt Romney's son. And there was some mockery of that. I thought that was gross and terrible and indefensible. This, in relation to the mocking of his name, I have really no time for that at all. The Joy Behar clip that we played, I thought was a little different, because that was simply showing the photo of X looking at Trump with Elon in the background, and the joke being, you know, the kid saying to the president, basically, "Why are you in my dad's seat?" as in, my dad's the real president. That to me isn't mocking the child. It is simply getting at the peculiar dynamics between Elon Musk and Donald Trump in a way that is amusing and abuses no one.
One of the things we've definitely lost over the past few decades is civility in our politics. It was once understood. You do not go after the children of political candidates, political office holders. It's just not done. Now it's been tread on a couple times. We all remember the draft the Bush twins bumper stickers from the Gulf War. The Obama children, though, were relatively protected. Barron Trump was not given a lot of heat from media or from Donald Trump's detractors. You need to be very, very careful. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is that his son X was there as part of a political operation, right? It was to soften Elon Musk's image. Elon Musk not doing very well in polls. I think it might have worked, though. Seeing him with this cute, adorable little kid, and he's, you know, going around the desk. It was kind of like a John F. Kennedy moment where his son John was under the desk, that kind of thing. I think that was a very, very smart move. That being said, though, this should be one of the cardinal rules of American politics. Stay away from the families. Unless they want to get political themselves, don't rag on them.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that, and certainly a child that is so young. I take your point about Elon Musk bringing the child in for what was obviously going to be a political event by its nature, and it probably does, as you say, soften his image, makes him seem less of the sort of bug-eyed fanatic that some people think that he is, frankly, or that you know, and are very skeptical of his actions. I do think, you know, the use of the child in that way, you could debate one way or another. That does not give license to mock the child. I did see, and this is perhaps unfortunate to have two men discussing this, I did see a number of women on Twitter make the point that if a high-ranking female government official had been in the office with a young child on her shoulders or playing around, that she would be criticized for that, or that there would be more question marks raised over it, which I do think is a valid point.
Well, we know that often females and males are treated differently in the political realm. I don't know about that. I think that kids can do a lot for a candidate. Kids can really help a candidate, especially small children, or they can be ridiculed. One of the instances I did forget about was Chelsea Clinton. I was in high school when Chelsea Clinton was the first daughter. She was mercilessly mocked for her appearance.
By Rush Limbaugh, I think.
By Rush Limbaugh, among others. And when you get to that high of a level, it's absolutely unacceptable. It's got to be so difficult to be a child growing up in a political environment, but especially with the magnifying glass on the White House. I don't wish it upon my worst enemy's children.
No.
But you grow up, and most of these children end up being quite successful. Chelsea Clinton has done very well for herself. So have the Bush twins. So it's a hard way to grow up. But I think the media has a responsibility not just to protect these young people who are in the White House, but to criticize them heavily when someone like the people on The View go after them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to give I guess a bipartisan note of praise. Jenna Bush in particular is still prominent because of her role in broadcasting, and to some extent the Obama girls are, Malia and Sasha. And those three people all seem very well-adjusted decent people as far as I can tell from their public persona or from what I've seen of it. Chelsea Clinton the same. So, you know, well done, whatever about the political debates, to the parents in raising children in what is clearly a very, very abnormal situation.
Interestingly enough, none of them have gone into politics afterwards, so maybe that's how they learned that lesson.
There was some speculation about Chelsea doing it, but she
was.
seems to have backed away from that more in recent years. Well, on that bipartisan, loving note toward children of all presidents, that does it for us today on Rising. Be sure to like, share and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining.